are excited to have you join us for the Come Follow Me 2021 podcast and study of the Doctrine and Covenants. Hosted by Rod Meldrum and Jonathan Neville. And presented by Gospel Doctrine Answers. In today's podcast, we will study Joseph Smith, History 1, verses 1 through 26. I saw a pillar of light.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of the Come Follow Me supplemental podcast with the Doctrine and Covenants in mind. We want to remind you that we have the Come Follow Me manual. We're expecting that you've probably already gone through this. This week is actually on Joseph Smith's history. This is verses 1 through 26. And essentially, this is the first vision. So I have had some opportunities to be there in Palmyra and the Sacred Grove numerous times over my life, and actually have had the privilege of taking a lot of other people there too. But I wanted to just point out, we all know about the first vision, and we're going to talk a little bit just briefly. I actually have quite a bit of supplemental information or supplemental video, actually, to show you today that I think you'll really enjoy. But just to begin with, basically, Joseph Smith history, we all know a lot about where the history came from and so forth, and actually a lot of this was actually done with the help of Oliver Cowdery, information that he put together. Actually, one of my very favorite sayings of Joseph Smith. And I've used this so many times over the course of the number of years of doing the research on the Book of Mormon. What is greater, faith or knowledge? And generally speaking, when I talk to groups, they'll say, well, faith is greater than knowledge. And then I have to remind them about this time in the early spring of 1820, when a young man by the name of Joseph Smith Jr. went into a grove of trees with a tremendous amount of faith that maybe he could have a prayer answered. And brothers and sisters, when he came out of that grove of trees, he no longer had faith that there was a God. He knew him. And that knowledge, I believe, is what gave Joseph Smith the strength to be able to overcome all of the adversity and trials and tribulations that he would have in his life. That doesn't mean that faith no longer plays a part, but if we learn from the Book of Mormon and the famous section in Alma about 32 about faith, it says that once you plant the seed and the seed grows, he says, then your faith becomes dormant because you know. So knowledge is actually something that God has. Knowledge is something that we should all seek after. Faith gets us to that point, and basically, as you increase your faith, you increase your knowledge, and then as you increase your knowledge, it increases your faith. So the two of them basically ratchet up until you can know more and more and become more and more knowledgeable, which is what basically God has had to do. This is in Joseph Smith History, verse 25. So it was with me. I had actually seen a light. In the midst of that light, I saw two personages, and they did in reality speak to me. And though I was hated and persecuted for saying that I had seen a vision, yet it was true. And while they were persecuting me, reviling me, and speaking all manner of evil against me falsely for saying, I was led to say in my heart, why persecute me for telling the truth? I have actually seen a vision, and who am I that I can withstand God? Or why does the world think to make me deny what I have actually seen? For I had seen a vision. I knew it, and I knew that God knew it, and I could not deny it. He says, neither dared I do it. At least I knew that by so doing I would offend God and come under condemnation. Notice he didn't say I had faith in it or I believed in it. He said he knew it. And it was that knowledge that I believe that gave him that strength to be able to overcome all the adversity. So that's what we should really be focused on is gaining or learning and gaining knowledge. Well, if you think about it, what was going on prior to this? Basically, you had the Nicene Creed, you had the Council of Nicene, who met and they basically determined the nature of God. They wanted to be able to talk to people and say, well, God is basically, he's everywhere, but he's really kind of nowhere. He's so large that he fills the universe, but he's so small he can dwell in your heart. And he has all of these ideas about God, that he was without any body, didn't have any passions, and so forth. That 14-year-old boy walking into that grove of trees literally changed the course of the entire world. When he came out of that grove of trees, he knew God. He said, you know what? He looks like us. He has a son. He has a physical body. And he has a voice. Like we can communicate. We can talk with each other. That completely set at naught all the philosophies of man that had been handed down from generation to generation through multiple different religions, and it basically set it on its end. So this is how God works with the simple and the weak, basically, to create his purposes. So if this is the case, or since this is the case, what would be one of the most significant dates in all of humanity? The date when Joseph Smith actually saw the Father and the Son and actually did that. But it's interesting because in church history, we really don't know when that date was exactly. And that's one of the things I wanted to bring out. So many of you may be aware of the fact that there was a lot of research that was done, actually, by a good friend of mine, John Lefgren. Shout out to John. Okay, and also John Pratt. And John Pratt is known for calendaring. He's an expert on calendaring. And John Lefgren basically is a fantastic researcher, and in fact, he's part of the Heartland Research Group that is going around and doing archaeological work back in the Midwest of the United States. A number of years ago, actually started to do some research, because we don't know one of the most significant dates in all of world history, and certainly in church history. We don't know what some of this date is, where the first vision happened. So he began to do some searching, some sleuthing, and he found out, basically what we know from the account is it was on an early spring day. It was a fairly decent weather, essentially. And then going through historical accounts and knowing what the Smith family knew, or what the Smith family was involved with at the time, early in the spring of the year, basically the Smith family made the vast majority of their income for the year, which is actually maple sugar production. They would tap all the trees in their big property there, and then they would basically harvest the maple syrup and then boil it down into maple sugar, and then sell that sugar. And that selling of that sugar was one of the big things that they were involved with. It was one of their major incomes of the year. And so the whole family was deeply involved with the whole process. And it's a big process to how to do that. In learning more about this process, and also combining with calendaring and so forth that John Pratt did, they corroborated independently of each other, and then they found each other, and they found that the dates that they both came up with actually corroborated pretty well, and they put it together in a wonderful film, and it's called Oh How Lovely Was the Morning. This is a DVD of that, and I'm going to play the video trailer for you right now so you can actually see. So go ahead and watch this real quick. This is Oh How Lovely Was the Morning trailer.
Early spring, 1820. A 14-year-old farm boy looks for a quiet place to pray. It would be his first uttered prayer, and that prayer would change the world. Nearly 200 years later, two men, Dr. John C. Lefgren and Dr. John P. Pratt, believe they have evidence for determining the date of Joseph Smith's first vision.
John Pratt is a friend of mine. He has a PhD in astronomy and has always had an interest in ancient religious calendars. I know of no one else who knows as much as he knows about these calendars.
John Lefgren and I have been friends for decades now. He's got a PhD in economics. He's worked for the State Department, but he's just got an insatiable desire to dig deeper and to research deeply. And I'd say he's a natural researcher.
Dr. Pratt's knowledge of the heavens and his expertise in the calendars of ancient cultures led him to the lost book of Enoch. The sacred calendar described within this book of Scripture allowed Dr. Pratt to understand the nature of Enoch's famous prophecy regarding the history of the world, including the timing of the event that would open the last dispensation. Dr. Lefgren, on the other hand, was scouring old newspapers and microfilmed weather reports for research he was conducting on a book he would publish. His examination of the records led him to a startling conclusion. When it came to the first vision, there was only one day in 1820 that met all the criteria laid out by Joseph Smith himself.
Some years ago, John Pratt wrote an article. And in that article, he identified a specific date for the first vision based on his calculation from the calendar of Enoch. I read that and I was very interested. I called him up and I said, I don't know how you got to that date, but I do know how to test it. I know the weather conditions for that time and that place. And if the weather wasn't lovely and beautiful, then you're wrong.
Wow, it had never occurred to me that anybody was taking weather observations back in 1820, and the temperature and whether it's clear or not. And John had been aware of that for actually a decade before my paper was published. And all I could think of was, wow, I hope this turns out okay, because he could either support the data, could either support my theory or disprove it entirely.
How Lovely Was the Morning is the story of two men and their quest to determine the exact date of young Joseph's first vision. Using ancient calendars, early military weather records, Enoch's prophecy, and of all things, the traditional New England process for deriving sugar from maple trees, Dr. Pratt and Dr. Lefgren reached identical conclusions. The precise date when a young farm boy found a secluded spot in the woods near his home. How Lovely Was the Morning takes you on a journey of discovery, opening new avenues of understanding, shining new light on records, documents, and scripture. Travel with John Lefgren and John Pratt as they explore the evidence and reveal the simple truth regarding the event that launched the restoration of the gospel in these, the latter days.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, this is really a phenomenal thing to be able to actually use outside sources and outside information from weather and climate and sugar production and so forth, and also calendaring, that all converges on a particular date. And that date, again, you need to check it out, but I'm not going to tell you right off the bat. But basically, it is pretty amazing to be able to see that. Now, if you'd like to see the entire documentary film, basically, it's only about 40 minutes long or so. Go ahead and click on. We have the links here below, and you can check that out. But it's just a really pretty phenomenal to be able to see how we can use and how actually these things corroborate a particular date that actually makes perfect sense with what Joseph Smith actually wrote down in his in the church history. As I've had the opportunity to go to the Sacred Grove, I have to tell you that it's such a unique and special place. It's just absolutely beautiful, so quiet and serene. But when you think about how many places there's been on the earth that God the Father himself and Jesus Christ also have been there, I personally believe that because of their power and their influence and their aura, if you will, that these places get permanently embedded with that spirit, that power of God. And people can feel that when you go to the Sacred Grove. I know so many people that we go on a tour and we can visit different sites, but we go to the Sacred Grove and there's something about that is really, really special. Places in Kirtland, for example, is another place that's really special. And there's other places in Ohio and things that we take people to that may have Book of Mormon significance. But the Sacred Grove is a really interesting place, and a lot of people don't know the fact that there's actually these some really interesting ancient walls, ancient stone fortifications, basically, that go right through the middle of the sacred grove. It's as if the Lord and the Nephites, as they were, and the Jaredites, as they were preparing for their final battles there in the area around Cumorah, that they actually left behind memoirs of their struggles that they had there in this sacred place. This is the area where the repository of the records of the Nephites was kept. This is the place where basically the Nephite civilization came to its end, as well as the Jaredite civilization. This entire area is such a sacred place because so many significant things from world history have happened here that it really makes a lot of sense that God the Father and Jesus Christ would actually come to this particular place to begin the restoration of the gospel. So I would like to share with you, when we take our tours, there's a little special place that I usually go to that's on the kind of the southern end of the property there at the Sacred Grove, the little amphitheater area, and share with you some insights and some thoughts that I would like to be able to help you to understand a little bit better, and hopefully this will be something that will be of benefit to you as you watch this. Enjoy that.
Okay.
Okay.
Wave your arms again. It helps me find you.
Okay, that way you know that. Okay, there we go. Well, thank you for listening to the Sacred Grove presentation that I do with our tours. I hope that it's been an inspiration for you. I hope you will ponder the sacredness of this place and and how God the Father and the Son actually condescended to come down to a 14-year-old lad in order to begin this great rolling forth of the gospel in these latter days. Brothers and sisters, I testify to you that I know that the first vision was a real event, that Joseph Smith really saw the Father and the Son, and that they gave him such a powerful testimony that they would know, that he would know forever, and be willing to actually give his life for the testimony that he stood for and the persecution that he took because of this singular event, one of the greatest events in all of world history. Now we know a little bit more about the possibility of the date that this actually happened, and hopefully you also know a little bit more about why this is such a sacred event and such a significant event in world history. Thank you, brothers and sisters. I hope you will enjoy this. I hope you'll take a chance, if you haven't had a chance already, to check out the Visualizing the Book of Mormon chronology. Basically has a lot of beautiful footage involving the Hill Cumorah, and we're gonna put some of that footage up here so you can actually take advantage of that. Then also the Hill Cumorah verifications and realistic archaeological expectations has some of the most beautiful footage of the Hill Cumorah and the surrounding area, which includes the Sacred Grove, the Smith family farm, and the Grandin Press and other significant places in church history. So I hope you'll enjoy that. The Hill Cumorah DVD actually has an image showing the Four Corners churches that is there in Palmyra that most people are somewhat familiar with there. Thank you so much, and hope you enjoyed this week. And we'll see you next week. We have Jonathan Neville is with us again next week, and we have some great things to share with you there. Thank you so much. Talk to you later. Now, I want to tell you, this is a special bookstore, and this is definitely a plug. If you get out there to Palmyra, you got to stop by the Grandin Press, because you got to find out about the miracles that happen in the printing of the Book of Mormon. there are about, they figure about I think it's 15 or 18 trees that are still alive today, that were alive as possibly little saplings, but they may have been actually trees at the time of the first vision. There's a number of these big trees. One of the problems is that they as they get older, they tend to start getting rotting from the inside out, and because the inner part of it, the sap pretty much runs on the outer part of the tree, and so the inner part does not getting as much nutrients, and it starts to die, and over time it will actually start to rot. And so a lot of these trees will actually be hollow on the inside. And then when they get to a certain point, then it weakens the tree enough that the tree is so tall and so big that a wind can snap them off. Yeah, they're taking some limbs off to keep it safe here. David, you asked about the area that the Smith family had. The Smith family had cleared the area right behind the log home and where that garden spot is, and about similar to what that's cleared right now. And then there's a little stream that runs right through there, and they had cleared it pretty down close to that stream. But everything on the other side of the stream they hadn't cleared, because this is their livelihood. These trees is what brought the Smiths most of their income. And so they wouldn't have cleared this area. So this rock wall that I'm going to show you as we head back over there for a little bit is pretty special, because if you go here and you ask the site missionaries, they're told to tell people that come here that the rock wall was done probably by the Smiths or somebody after them. But several of the trees that are entangled that are on top of the rock wall are older than when the Smiths were even here. So in other words, it was before this area had been settled or plowed or any of that kind of stuff. So the rock wall was here earlier. The other thing is if the Smiths were involved with moving these rocks, they would have been pretty much nothing but moving rocks for several years. When you see just the sheer numbers, hundreds of thousands of rocks. And why would the Smiths, if they were hauling them from the only area that they cleared, which is clear over here about a quarter of a mile, why would they haul all those rocks from there over here when at the time the way that they would do it, they would, as people were clearing land, they would take the small rocks and they would move them out to the edges of their gardens to keep keep the smaller critters out and kind of discourage cows and so forth from getting in there. So they didn't haul them a quarter of a mile away out in the middle of the forest and then put them in a not perfectly straight, but in a straight line, not only on their property, but it extends clear out to the far side and continues on off of the Smith family property, and it also continues this direction, this way, and continues off. So if the Smiths were the ones that were doing this, they were not very nice neighbors, because they were hauling their rocks and putting on somebody else's land. I doubt that that's the case.
Now this one here is not in the Sacred Grove. This is actually right in front of the Palmyra Temple. If you walk out of the front doors of the Palmyra Temple, you're looking at a retaining wall. If you go around the retaining wall and go up on top of it, it's a stone wall, and it follows the top of a ridge. On the other side of the ridge, it drops almost 80 feet down to a lower level down there, and that stone wall follows that ridge along there. And it goes for that one, it was almost 40 minutes to walk that wall. And it goes into at least 3 other properties.
which means that these ancient walls were actually put here by a people previous to the Smiths. And who would that be? Well, it could be the older Native Americans, but they didn't build rock walls. Why would they build rock walls in the first place?
Keep animals in or out?
See, the Nephites, the Jaredites, we don't know how much time they had to prepare for this, but the Nephites had 6 years, approximately. They had a certain period of time, about 6 years, from when Mormon received the approval from the Lamanite king to gather all of the people to the land of Cumorah. And they gathered all of the people from Zarahemla, Bountiful, etc., and they gathered all the people to one place here in the land of Cumorah. And they had 6 years. Now, when the early historians came out in this area, like in there's a book, Pioneer History of Western New York, clear back in early 1800s. And in that, he talked about how the fortifications around this area he called them rude fortifications. He said they were not built pretty, they were pretty much just basic. They weren't, and apparently they must have been somewhat familiar with what they had seen people had seen over in Ohio. He said, these are all perfectly laid out, beautifully, round and octagons and squares and so forth. But these things here were just quickly dug up, thrown up, a lot of gaps in between places. But archaeologists and others have been able to determine now that we have essentially 3 rings of defensive structures that are concentric to the Hill Cumorah. In other words, you have the Hill Cumorah here. On the south and west side, there's a ring that comes out. It's about 2 or 3 miles. It ranges between 2 and 3 miles away from the hill, and it kind of a semi-concentric circle around the Hill Cumorah. About 4 or 5 miles beyond that, and it ranges from about 4 up to about 7 miles beyond that, there's another concentric ring that goes around that. And then about 15 miles beyond that, there's another concentric ring that goes beyond that. The outer one is very hit and miss. As you get closer, they're actually more completed. But what we believe is that the Nephites were creating a multi-stage defense system, which is basically an outer perimeter. And then if the Lamanites would attack them, they would be able to hide behind those walls and attack, or defend. But then if they got overrun, they could then fall back to the next ring. And then if they got overrun, they could fall back to the last ring. And after that, it was over. So they had the ability to be able to fall back. It's a pretty brilliant military strategic maneuver, but the Prophet Mormon and Moroni knew that this is not going to be enough. Without God, it's never going to be enough. And the people were beyond feeling. But there were probably battles clear out as far as Rochester, or even further out beyond that some battles happened as the Lamanite masses, if you want to call them the Lamanite hordes, basically were coming into the area. They said that that when they saw the size of the Lamanite army, that they're, I can't remember how they put it, but they basically just, the fear of God came into them. They knew this is not gonna end well, right? So I think it's just interesting that the place, the physical location where 2 great civilizations, the covenant people of God, both ended, just happens to be the beginning of a new dawn as a new civilization takes over this nation and moves forward with the gospel of Jesus Christ restored. And so wanted to see if we can pull out our songbooks. Probably most of us probably know this pretty well, but
Joseph Smith's first prayer.
Oh, how lovely was the morning.
Oh, how lovely was the morning. I think it's number 26. Oh, how lovely was the morning.
saw the God of love when within the shady woodland Joseph saw the God of love, humbly kneeling, sweet appealing. 'Twas the boy's first attack when the tower of sin assailing filled his soul with deep despair. But undaunted still he trusted in his heavenly Father's care. But undaunted still he trusted in his heavenly Father's care. Suddenly a light descended, brighter far than noonday sun, and the gliding glorious pillar o'er him fell, around him shone, while appeared to heavenly beings God the Father and the Son, while appeared to heavenly beings God the Father and the Son. Joseph, this is my beloved, hear him, oh how sweet the word. Joseph's humble prayer was answered, and he listened to the Lord. Oh, what rapture filled his bosom, for he saw the living God. Oh, what rapture filled his bosom, for he saw the living God. That was awesome. So as we contemplate the return back to mankind of the creator of this universe, the creator of the and the creator of this earth, the two of them coming back and appearing to a young boy. It's amazing. If they wanted to have the world automatically accept it, they probably wouldn't have come to a 14-year-old. But it was the miracle of that young boy here in this sacred space that forever changed our understanding and our connection with our Father in heaven. You see, the Nicene Creed, men had decided that after Christ and his disciples were killed off and separated, that later on men decided that they needed to come to an understanding, or at least come to a conclusion, or come to some kind of a concession, or consensus, that's the word I'm looking for. Some kind of a consensus as to who and what God is. And that's when we got the doctrine of that God is everywhere and nowhere. He fills the universe, but it's so small he can dwell in your heart. The incomprehensible, which I believe is what Satan wanted to have, to be able to disconnect us from our true heritage, a godly heritage.
And that connection was re-established in this sacred place. And all of a sudden, when Joseph Smith, I love Joseph Smith's statement. He said that it was because of this. He said that when the persecutions around him, when he were beleaguering his family, were causing them, the saints and those who would follow Christ, to be driven from place to place. His faith never wavered, and I think the statement that I love the most of Joseph Smith is the one he said that the reason why he could not deny this was because he said, I knew it, and I knew that God knew it, and I could not deny it. And even though he would ultimately give his life for that testimony, it was that knowledge that he received here. He came into this grove of trees with a tremendous amount of faith. But brothers and sisters, I testify to you that when he left this grove of trees, he no longer had faith that there was a God. He knew him. And that he had a son. And that has made it all possible for us to be able to come and return one day to the most glorious of all personages. Return and live with our Father, because he is our Father and he does love us. We are his children, and we look like him because we're his offspring. We did not come from some lower life form. No matter what science says or what they think about this, nothing can ever change my testimony that I know that God lives. I know that Jesus Christ is his son, that he suffered and died on the cross for each one of us and for my own personal sins. And because of him, I have a chance, and you have a chance, and all of you have a chance to go back and be with our Father again someday. The best thing is we get to be with our families. So I hope that we're going to just take another few minutes and just walk into the grove. I'd like to show you the walls that may have been placed here, stone by stone, by two of the greatest civilizations that have ever been on the earth, as they counted down the last days of their civilization, and thereby making this spot unbelievably sacred.
To me, this is not just another nation. It is not just one of the family of nations. This is a nation with a great mission to perform for the benefit of liberty-loving people everywhere. It is my firm conviction that the Constitution of this land was established by men whom the God of heaven raised up unto that very purpose. This is part of my religious faith.
Get the very latest edition of the Annotated Book of Mormon available now in the bookstore at bookofmormonevidence.org.